So this video is going to be a little bit different than these typical daily glimpses that we've been doing the last few days. But I had some thoughts come together in my mind this morning and I just had to get them out. So I want to start us out by harkening back to our fundamental myth. And by myth, I mean a story that is more true than a historical story or a scientific account of something. A myth is a story with perennial patterns of meaning, patterns that are always with us, always recurring. And that's the story of Adam and Eve. And it's important to remember that the word Adam is the name of an individual, but it's also the word for humanity or mankind. One way of seeing this story is something like our earliest memory as humanity, our best attempt at describing where we came from. And where does our earliest memory take place? Interestingly, it takes place in a garden, a food forest that supplied our needs spontaneously. Everything there seems to have regenerated naturally, although we did have the injunction to take care of the garden and to cultivate it. So this idea of cultivation and care goes all the way back to the beginning. And in this state, it also says we walked with God openly. But we weren't like what we are now. In that garden, we were innocent, unprotected. There's a sense that we weren't quite awake. We were like children. And then we made this choice to open up our eyes, shatter our innocence, become fully conscious, and realize our vulnerability, our limitation, our inevitable death, our capacity for mistake, and our capacity to consciously harm one another. And this was all mixed bag because with that did come a greater degree of knowledge, the knowledge to be like the gods. And folks, that's exactly what happened. Consider the fact that today, in 2020, humanity has achieved powers that for the rest of human history were the literal powers of the gods. We have powers to change landscapes. We can send information through the air. We can soar into the heavens. We can destroy whole civilizations with fire. And we can manipulate the very processes of life. These were the powers of the gods throughout humanity. And now we have them because we chose to go down this path of knowledge. But this all came at a cost, because something about pursuing this kind of knowledge naturally kicked us out of that garden, that paradise, that food forest, that state of innocence. It's the same innocence you see in little babies and toddlers. And what's so fascinating is that you also see them lose it in your homes, starting around the age of where they become self-conscious and start gaining the ability to be selfish, nasty, lying, vengeful little devils some of the time. And by the age of 14 or so, the process is complete. They are fallen beings. But of course, that's all part of growing up. And that seems to be what humanity was up to, growing up. Right after we kicked ourselves out of that garden, then you get the Cain and Abel story, where man demonstrates his murderous capacity. And immediately after that, you have the start of civilization, tool making, metallurgy, music, agriculture, all by the descendants of Cain. So for a long time, we've realized that our technology and our supplements are this mixed bag. They have made us so powerful. They allow us to get so far away from the original garden state, even to the point that we can go out into the far, black, cold reaches of space in that technology. But at the same time, we long to get back to the garden. And the story of humanity ever since has been, how do we get ourselves back to that garden, to paradise? For a lot of reasons, the garden can be seen as a mountain. And at the top of the mountain is the tree of life. So the question is, how do we reascend that mountain, get back to the garden, and get back to the tree of life? Countless people have spent lifetimes trying to answer that question. Some people place the answer to that question in another world beyond this one. A heaven after this life in another place. But I think that's the wrong conception. Fast forward to the end of our fundamental myth, to the end of the Bible, to the book of Revelations. And there you have a vision of how this is all supposed to end. And this vision is of a massive heavenly city, a holy city, with walls of immense distance. You have this notion that the whole earth has been transformed into this heavenly city. But right at the very center of the holy city, what do you find? You find the garden again, and you find that tree of life. So one of the ways I interpret this is that the solution that we're after is how to unify this knowledge that we've gained, our civilization, our technology, with the garden and with the tree of life. And how do we get the garden and the tree of life back at the center of our existence? We watch these sci-fi shows with visions of the future, of sleek skyscrapers and spotless shining streets. But honestly, I don't think that's the answer at all. We've already built places like that, and they're neat and they're novel, but those aren't the places I would want to live forever. You can disagree with me on that, but I find it interesting that in so many stories, whenever the main story has been completed, the adventure, then so often you find that people end up in a setting placed in nature, in a farm or a house by a lake. For a very crude example, even Thanos ended up in a pastoral setting. In my opinion, we ought to be aiming for something much more like Lord of the Rings, the Shire, Rohan, and particularly the elves in that world. And I'm talking loosely here, but what I mean is a state where civilization and nature have reached a regenerative coexistence that is full of culture and beauty, where humanity augments the natural world. It doesn't destroy it or replace it. Even in Lord of the Rings, it contains the opposite of that story, and that's the story of Saruman, when he destroys the landscape around him to build this great industrial power. And so I think that's where our myth takes us. It takes us back to the garden, back to the tree of life, but with our progression and knowledge that came from this process of waking up and developing our knowledge and our technology. So the idea is not to take off our clothes and retreat back into the wilderness. I think the compelling vision is the union of civilization with the garden and the tree of life at the center. And that, at a fundamental level, is what we're trying to do here on this little farmstead. Take the best of human knowledge and recultivate the garden, the food forest, and the tree of life. Leave everything out that's ugly, because, like I said the other day, beauty will guide us in this process. There's that Dostoevsky quote, that beauty will save the world. And I really believe that. I think we've allowed too many ugly things into our society in the name of efficiency and utility. I'm talking about refineries, strip mining, gravel pits, endless parking lots, power lines, concrete landscapes, unadorned buildings that look like factories but are really schools. And of course, it's not just about the physical nature of things, it's all about relationships. There can be beautiful and ugly relationships. Our relationship with the earth, the microbes, the animals, and especially each other. Ultimately, our little project here is just as much about how we're relating to each other as a family, and to our community, and to the divine, as it is about how we're relating to this landscape. There's no division there. So we're trying to cultivate this in our little corner of the world because that's how I think this happens. People like you and me taking upon themselves the responsibility of creating this union of civilization and the garden, wherever you are, and with whatever you have dominion over. You start with yourself, and you build out from there to your family and your community. And that's literally as far as most of us ever even need to go. Imagine if everybody did that for the next 50 years. What would the world look like? I think it's kind of incredible that we have everything we need to accomplish this. We have enough and to spare. Enough land, enough knowledge, enough people. We have everything we need. But at the same time, we also have everything we need to utterly destroy humanity. And it's sobering to think that we're at that kind of dichotomy at this moment in history. We're either going to create one world or the other from here. And let me be real clear at this point that this is no striving for utopia or for perfection. I know that that always ends poorly. This is a process of progress. And I truly believe that it's in that process that we find heaven. Heaven is not a place or a location. Heaven is not a destination. It's a state of being that we can enter into right now, in this life and in this world. We fully expect to make mistakes along the way, and these are sins, missings of the mark. But then you reassess, you change course, and you change your heart and get back on track. This is the way. All right, folks, that really is what we're up to here. And I know it's more of a mythological framework, but I don't know any other better way to explain what we're really up to. We are trying to find that union between the civilization and the garden. That's really the story that we're trying to live in. And it's the grandest story we have found to be able to participate in. And it's what is making life meaningful for us right now. So tomorrow we'll kind of resume to normal programming, but these are just some thoughts that I wanted to get out there and how to do so in a little more formal way. So this is Nuila signing off from Mission Top Farmstead and Ranch. We'll see you tomorrow.